A Quran moment.
أفلا يتدبرون القرآن أم على قلوب أقفالها.
Then do they not reflect upon the Qur'an, or are there locks upon their hearts? Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another Qur'an moment. We're carrying on with Surah al Baqarah, and before we carry on with the next verse, I'd just like to recap. The question we have here is, what topics has this surah covered so far? Well, the first 5 ayat, which started from Alif Lam Mim, we talked about that as being the broken letters, which some scholars understand is an indication of the miraculous nature of the Qur'an. And then ayah number 2, number 3, number 4 and 5 talk about the muttaqeen, the people who fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and their qualities. And essentially we're talking about the believers. Let's carry on to the next question. On page 3 and 4 of the Qur'an, in the standard print, you find that the first 2 verses talk about the disbelievers, but then you have a batch of verses from verse number 8 all the way up to verse number 20, and they're 13 verses talking about the hypocrites. Let's start by comparing the beginning of these 2 sections and contrast the two. What do you see? First, the beginning of the section dealing with the disbelievers does not have wa, it is just inna. Whereas if we look at the beginning section of the hypocrites, we have a conjunction wa and. Wa minan nas, and amongst people. Now, so we can divide these group of verses into verses 2 to 5 dealing with the believers, verses 6 to 7 dealing with the disbelievers, and verses 8 to 20 dealing with the hypocrites. And because there's no wa between 2 to 5 and 6 and 7, it's like a big change of topic. But this wa implies there's a connection between the verses on the disbelievers and the hypocrites. Let's read verse number 8. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. ومن الناس من يقول آمنا بالله وباليوم الآخر وما هم بمؤمنين. ومن الناس, and among the people, من يقول are those who say, آمنا بالله وباليوم الآخر, we believe in Allah and the last day. وما هم بمؤمنين, but they are not believers. Let's go through this ayah. وَمِنَ النَّاسِ, one of the first words we find is النَّاسِ, which literally means the people. The singular of the word النَّاسِ is insan, a person. So we could represent a person or the singular by a single dot. And the word النَّاسِ is the plural, hence 3 dots. A related word is nuwais. Nuwais literally means a small person, so here's a smaller dot compared to a bigger dot. The word an-nas is one of those interesting words in Arabic. Let's split it up to see what's going on. An-nas is made up of alif, lam, nun, alif, sin. The actual word is here, nun, alif, and sin, nas. Alif and lam are the definite article, which just means the. Let's try and break that down a bit more. We're looking at the root letters. Remember, alif cannot be a root letter, so it must either be a waw or a ya, or sometimes a hamza that's hidden. Remember this word, the small man, nuwais. Now, the word nuwais implies that the root letter is in the middle. and hence the root word was nasa yanusu, which literally means to move. Hence people are called people because they move around a lot. Probably they move from place to place. Other scholars say no, that's not correct. They have a different opinion. They say the root letter, the one in blue, was actually shifted from its third position to the second position when it became nas, but its original position is in the third place. Hence you get, and it's actually a ya, nasiya. And nasiya means to forget. Hence Ibn Abbas said, in a statement attributed to him, nasiya Adamun ahdallahi fasumya insanan. Adam alayhi salam forgot the promise that he had made to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and hence he was named insan, somebody who forgets. So people are called people because they are people who forget. It's a human characteristic. A third opinion is that the root of the word nas, in the actual weak letter, was at the beginning of the word, and it then shifted to the middle. And then you get the word anisa, and anisa literally means to socialize. So people are called people, and nas are called nas, because they like to socialize with other people. This surah talks about believing in the last day, وَبِالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ. So what marks the start and end of the last day? Well, the start starts with the resurrection, when people are brought back to life, and continues until the end, which is when people are settled into paradise or hell, Jannah or Jahannam. We seek refuge in Allah from Jahannam, and we ask Allah to grant us Jannatul Firdaus. Let's look back at the word An-Nas. وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَقُولُ آمَنَّا بِاللَّهِ وَبِالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ. And among the people, An-Nas, the people. We met the word An-Nas, and we worked out where it may have come from. Now the interesting question here is, why aren't these hypocrites called disbelievers? So the hypocrites that are being dealt with in this verse are the ones who do not believe in Islam. So why not simply say وَمِنَ الْمُنَافِقِينَ, from the hypocrites? Why does it say وَمِنَ النَّاسِ? Or why doesn't it simply describe the hypocrites as disbelievers? وَمِنَ الْكُفَّارِ, the disbelievers who say. So it's a very interesting point. The example of a believer is somebody who on the outside expresses their belief, and it mirrors the same beliefs on the inside. And that's a believer. A disbeliever on the outside does not agree with Islam and refuses to accept it, and on the inside also believes the same thing. So there is consistency between their internal state and their external state. And that's a disbeliever. But the hypocrite on the outside looks like a believer, behaves like a believer when in the company of other believers, but on the inside is a disbeliever. So they don't really fit into the category of believers, and they don't fit into the category of disbelievers. Hence hypocrites in this verse are neither believers nor open disbelievers, and therefore the ambiguous term itself, An-Nas, has been used to describe them. Another example of the precision in this ayah is the use of the word يَقُولُ. وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَقُولُ. And amongst people are those who say. Now, what does the word say indicate? Well, it's quite obvious. Here's a person, and this is what he says when he's a hypocrite. He says, I love Islam and I love everything to do with it. But this is what he thinks. He does not like Islam. And hence, the word say is pointing to us and telling us that what they say is just a word. It's not actually reflecting what they believe. In this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala points out the exact words the hypocrites use. They say, آمَنَّا بِاللَّهِ وَبِالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ. We believe in Allah and the last day. The question is, why do they mention Allah and why do they mention the last day? To understand this, we have to contrast this with the points of belief that were mentioned in ayah number 2 to 5, at the beginning of this surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, talking about the very first aspect of belief, about the muttaqeen, or the believers, الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ, they believe in the unseen. And the most unseen thing in the unseen world is, of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God. And right at the end of the 5 ayat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَبِالْآخِرَةِ هُمْ يُوقِنُونَ, and they are certain of the hereafter. And these people mention that they also believe in the last day. So you get the impression they're saying we believe in the most important thing that we have to believe, right at the beginning and right at the very end. And so the impression they give is they believe in everything in between. It's like a teacher who sets some homework to read a book, and a student goes back home and comes the next day and says, the teacher asks him, have you read it? And in reality he only read the first chapter and the last chapter. And he answers, I read from the first chapter to the last chapter, trying to give the impression that he's read every chapter in between, when he hasn't read anything. It's exactly the same here. The hypocrites are trying to give the impression, we believe in Allah and we believe in the last day, and in everything in between. But they do not mention believing in prayer, they do not mention charity, they do not mention believing in revelation, because these are all the practical aspects. If you believe in prayer, that's a sign that you're reliant on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Charity is a very clear sign of your practical sacrifice in this world based on your belief. And believing in revelation, as we said, means you believe in the Quran, the Sunnah, and the books that came before, i.e. the authority of all the prophets in all your actions. So now we've come to the end of the ayah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking and giving his judgment upon the claim of the people who are hypocrites, and replies by saying, وَمَا هُمْ بِمُؤْمِنِينَ, but they are not believers. So that is clearly what is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's judgment. And what the question here is, what is the B for? To understand this, it's worthwhile sometimes stripping back and then building up to what we find in the Quran and the Arabic. If we wanted to say they are believers, we would say hum mu'minun. And then if we wanted to negate this sentence, we could put the word ma hum mu'minun, they are not believers. But by putting the B in front of the word believers, mu'minun, it changes the waw to a ya, so it becomes bi mu'minin, and it adds emphasis. They are not believers, exclamation mark. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's judgment is that these people are not believers, and in fact we could have translated it as saying they are definitely not believers, and that's the secret behind the ba. So imagine it's an exclamation mark. So let's summarize what we've learned. First of all, we saw that there are 2 groups of verses that occur after the first 5 verses in Surah al Baqarah. The first 5 were talking about the believers, the next 2 are talking about the disbelievers, and the 13 verses that come together after that are talking about the hypocrites. The hypocrites are not referred to as hypocrites, and this is a play and reflection on the 2 sets of verses that occurred before, which talked about the believers and then the clear disbelievers, and instead the hypocrites are called people. So they're neither called believers because they don't quite fit into that category, and neither are they disbelievers because they don't quite fit into that open disbeliever category. Here we're talking about hypocrites who are internally disbelievers. The Quran highlights the choice of their words when they speak to people and say that they believe in Allah and the last day, but they deliberately miss everything in between, and they try and give the impression that they believe in everything in between. And finally, the Quran's conclusion that these people who are being referred to in this particular verse are definitely not believers. Alhamdulillah, we've come to the end of this presentation. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.